The Holy Grail, a treasure steeped in centuries of lore, has become one of the most enduring and sought-after symbols in Western culture. It is a mystical object that captures the imagination of humanity, woven into the fabric of Arthurian legend, where its significance transcends mere myth. The Grail has been interpreted as the ultimate spiritual object, sought by knights, kings, and adventurers, whose quest for it embodies a journey toward redemption, self-discovery, and divine grace. King Arthur, the legendary monarch who united Britain under his rule, is the central figure in this quest. Arthur's rise to power came when he was able to pull the sword from the stone, an act that only the true king could accomplish. But this sword, though a symbol of Arthur's authority, was broken in battle, and in its place, he acquired the magical sword Excalibur from the mysterious Lady of the Lake. This sword, more than just a weapon, symbolized the power of divine intervention and the sanctity of kingship. The origins of the Grail story remain uncertain, though scholars point to multiple influences: Celtic myths, Christian legend, Oriental traditions, and possibly others, interwoven over centuries to form a symbol of spiritual quest and divine grace. The Grail itself has been depicted in many forms, from a chalice or dish to a magical stone, said to possess extraordinary powers. The ability to provide immortality, eternal youth, and healing powers. The notion of a mystical object capable of offering infinite nourishment is thought to be inspired by the Celtic myth of the cauldron of Dagda, the druid god. This magical cauldron was believed to be bottomless, able to feed an entire army without ever running dry. Furthermore, it was said that only the virtuous could partake in its bounty, an idea that ties into the spiritual purity required to find the Grail. The word Grail is itself shrouded in mystery. Most etymologists trace its roots back to the Old French grail, derived from the Latin word gradalis, meaning a cup or platter, a vessel that served multiple courses in medieval feasts. But over time, the Grail transformed in both mythological significance and symbolism, becoming an object linked to Christian salvation and spiritual fulfillment. Its original connotation was less about holiness, and more about the idea of a vessel that could contain the essence of life itself, the one object capable of holding divine power. The Grail, as an object of spiritual salvation, first entered Arthurian legend with the work of Chrétien de Troyes, the French poet whose Perceval, or Story of the Grail, introduced this sacred quest into the realm of medieval literature. Perceval, the poem's protagonist, embarked on a quest that would shape the future of the Grail legend, though, in Chrétien's version, the Grail is not yet the singular object of ultimate divinity. Instead, it is one piece of a broader spiritual puzzle, much like the lance that accompanies it in the sacred procession. Perceval, a young man raised far from the dangers of society, represents innocence and naivety. He is, at first, unaware of the chivalric code and the complexities of life, much like the modern seeker who embarks on a journey of self-discovery without understanding the challenges ahead. When he first encounters the knights of Arthur's court, he is ridiculed for his lack of experience. Yet, through his courage and the act of slaying the Red Knight, he earns his place among them. However, Perceval's true spiritual awakening does not occur in the knight's training or in the bravery of battle, but during his encounter with the Fisher King, a man who is deeply wounded, both physically and spiritually. The Fisher King, who guards the Grail, is an embodiment of a king whose land lies barren due to his own wounds. His impotence and suffering reflect the state of the world around him, a barren kingdom where spiritual decay mirrors the king's own condition. Perceval, having been trained in the ways of chivalry, does not ask the essential question that could heal the Fisher King. His silence in the face of the sacred procession, a moment that includes the showing of the Grail, becomes his greatest spiritual failure. In his ignorance, he fails to ask the vital question that could restore the king, and, by extension, the land. The question is simple, yet profound. Whom does one serve with the Grail? The failure to ask it results in Perceval's spiritual blindness, a moment that mirrors our own failures to question and seek understanding in moments of profound divine opportunity. Transition to the quest for meaning. Perceval's journey thus sets the stage for a larger spiritual journey. His quest for the Grail is not just a physical journey to a distant castle, but a psychological journey towards spiritual enlightenment. Throughout his travels, he encounters mysterious figures, such as the Maiden Blanchefleur, who represent temptation and distraction, pulling him away from the true purpose of his quest. Yet it is only when he returns to the hermit, confronting his inner darkness and accepting the consequences of his ignorance, that Perceval begins to understand the deeper nature of his journey. Through fasting, praying, and self-reflection, Perceval learns the true nature of the Grail, something that transcends material wealth and earthly glory. The Grail represents not only spiritual redemption, but also the unity of opposites, the balance of light and dark, life and death, purity and imperfection. It is through self-purification that Perceval, much like the seeker in every spiritual tradition, comes to understand that the true Grail is not an object to be found externally, but a state of being that must be cultivated internally. The significance of the Grail in spiritual traditions. The Grail is more than just an object, it is a symbol of spiritual fulfillment and inner transformation. Across cultures, the Holy Grail represents the journey towards enlightenment, self-realization, and the ultimate pursuit of divine truth. In Christianity, it is often depicted as the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper, a vessel that holds the blood of Christ, representing sacrifice, redemption, and spiritual salvation. However, its meaning transcends Christianity and aligns with various spiritual quests in numerous traditions. In the Celtic tradition, the Grail is closely tied to the idea of the cauldron, a vessel believed to hold the power of life, death, and rebirth. The cauldron of Dagda, which never runs dry, is said to feed the hungry, symbolizing the divine ability to provide for the soul's spiritual hunger. Similarly, in the Arthurian legend, the Grail holds the power to heal the wounded, both physically and spiritually, a concept that ties into the idea of spiritual rejuvenation and divine intervention in the lives of the faithful. The Grail's transformative power lies in its connection to the divine spark that resides within each individual. In both Christian and pagan contexts, the Grail symbolizes the connection between humanity and the divine, offering salvation and illumination. In this sense, the Grail is not just an external object to be found, but an internal quest, representing the deep desire for spiritual union with the divine. It is self-purification and divine grace that allow the seeker to attain the Grail, not through mere seeking, but through becoming. The internal struggles and obstacles on the path. However, the quest for the Grail is not an easy journey. The seeker must face many inner struggles and external obstacles that test their resolve. The challenge of finding the Grail reflects the spiritual struggles that every individual faces on their own path towards self-realization. Like Perceval, the seeker is often confronted with temptations, doubts, and distractions that threaten to derail their quest. These obstacles mirror the inner conflicts, such as fear, greed, and pride, that block the path to spiritual enlightenment. Throughout the quest, the individual is also confronted by tests of character, requiring them to demonstrate virtue and selflessness. In Arthurian legend, the knights who seek the Grail are required to prove their worthiness through acts of courage, humility, and moral purity. This process symbolizes the need to purify the heart and mind in order to receive the divine blessings that the Grail offers. The challenge is not just about physical endurance or bravery. It is a test of inner strength and spiritual maturity. The Grail quest requires the seeker to transform their own weaknesses into strengths, much like the process of spiritual purification in other traditions. It is not enough to simply desire the Grail. It must be earned through self-reflection, penance, and devotion. Only those who are truly pure of heart and mind can attain the Grail, making the journey both a personal and collective endeavor that involves both the individual seeker and the greater spiritual community. The quest as a symbol of the hero's journey. The Grail quest follows a classic structure often associated with the hero's journey, a mythic pattern identified by Joseph Campbell that appears across many cultures and stories. According to Campbell, the hero must first experience a call to adventure, followed by a descent into darkness and a return to the light after overcoming trials. In the case of the Grail, this journey is not just about finding an object, but about undergoing a profound transformation of the self. In the Arthurian legend, knights such as Gawain, Lancelot, and Perceval are called to search for the Grail, each embarking on their own individual journey. Along the way, they encounter various trials that test their virtue, resolve, and loyalty. However, the journey is as much about their internal growth as it is about finding the Grail itself. The obstacles they face, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, push them to confront their flaws and grow as individuals. The hero's journey is ultimately about self-discovery and spiritual growth. The Grail quest symbolizes the path toward becoming one's true self, acknowledging the light and dark within, and striving for spiritual perfection. The ultimate goal is not simply to obtain the Grail, but to be transformed by the journey itself, to find inner peace, divine understanding, and wholeness. The Grail quest represents the spiritual transformation that occurs when the seeker faces their inner darkness and emerges into the light of understanding. The journey is a symbol of personal and collective growth, where individuals are not only challenged by external forces, but also by the inner conflicts they must overcome. Perceval's failure to ask the right question becomes a critical lesson in the spiritual journey. It is a reminder that we must confront our inner ignorance, face our fears, and seek truth with humility. Only through this transformation can the seeker reach the Grail. The Grail, as a symbol of spiritual fulfillment, is not attained through brute force or external efforts alone. It is obtained by purifying the heart, recognizing the deeper truth, and learning to live with integrity. The seeker must become worthy of the Grail, and through this process, they achieve self-realization, spiritual awakening, and the ability to bring healing to the world. The Grail, as a symbol of unity and divine connection. The Holy Grail is often seen as a symbol of unity, the unification of the divine and the earthly, the physical and the spiritual. This connection is not just about the Grail as an object, it represents the divine truth that transcends material existence. In many interpretations, the Grail serves as a metaphor for divine grace or the universal consciousness that binds all living things together. It is a symbol of the soul's quest to reconnect with the divine source, offering nourishment, wisdom, and enlightenment. The Grail's role as a symbol of unity is further reflected in the Arthurian legend, where it is not simply a treasure to be found, but a spiritual goal that requires the seeker to align themselves with higher principles of truth, love, and service. The Grail is not meant to be hoarded or controlled by one person. Rather, it is to be shared with the world, symbolizing the divine essence that exists in every individual and connects them to the larger spiritual truth of existence. The journey toward the Grail, then, is as much about spiritual sharing as it is about personal transformation. In many spiritual traditions, this idea of unified consciousness is reflected in the notion that to truly experience the divine, one must overcome the separation between self and other. The Grail represents the return to wholeness, where the seeker no longer sees themselves as separate from the divine, but as an integral part of the universal fabric of life. This shift in perception is central to the spiritual quest, allowing the seeker to experience a deep connection to the world, others, and the divine presence. The role of purity in attaining the Grail. In the Arthurian legend, one of the most significant challenges in attaining the Grail is the concept of purity, a quality that must be attained in order to become worthy of receiving the Grail's divine gifts. Purity is not just about moral or sexual purity, but about the purity of intentions, heart, and spirit. Only those who are pure of heart, those who seek the Grail with the right motivations, selflessness, humility, and a desire for spiritual growth, are able to approach the Grail. Purity in the Grail quest is also associated with sacrifice. The knights who undertake the Grail quest must be willing to sacrifice their personal desires, pride, and even their lives for the sake of the greater good. Perceval, in his story, fails to ask the critical question at the Fisher King's castle, because he is unable to fully understand the depth of his own purity and innocence. His failure is symbolic of the inner journey that every seeker must face, the need to purify one's desires and align them with higher spiritual values. This connection between purity and the Grail also touches upon the sacredness of service. To attain the Grail, one must be willing to serve others, putting aside personal gain in favor of helping the greater good. The Grail is a divine gift, and its powers are meant to be used for spiritual healing and service, rather than personal profit or power. In this sense, the Grail represents divine responsibility, the need to live in harmony with the divine principles of love, compassion, and integrity. The transformational power of the Grail in the modern world. In modern contexts, the Grail has evolved from a literal object into a symbol of spiritual fulfillment and self-actualization. While the Grail in Arthurian legend remains tied to a specific quest, today it is often viewed as a metaphor for personal growth and the search for meaning in life. The journey to attain the Grail represents the human struggle to find purpose, to overcome inner darkness, and to experience enlightenment. It is a metaphor for the path to self-realization, where the seeker faces challenges and internal battles before ultimately discovering their true spiritual nature. In this sense, the Grail is not just a distant goal to be attained, but a process, a spiritual journey toward becoming whole and aligned with higher truth. The modern-day Grail can be seen as the pursuit of inner peace, self-empowerment, and the ability to live in harmony with one's spiritual path. It represents the deep yearning of the soul to reconnect with its true essence and with the divine forces that govern the universe. The idea of spiritual enlightenment and personal transformation is central to the modern interpretation of the Grail. Today, individuals who seek to heal themselves or find deeper meaning in life often turn to practices such as meditation, mindfulness, and self-reflection, all of which are symbolic of the Grail quest. The goal is not to find a physical object, but to experience spiritual awakening. To attain the Grail by transcending the ego and aligning with divine wisdom, the Grail serves as a symbol of the journey towards self-realization, the process of integrating the light and dark aspects of the self and aligning with higher spiritual truths. To achieve this, one must confront their own internal struggles, face their fears, and engage in a deep process of self-reflection. Like the Knights of the Grail, the seeker must demonstrate purity of heart, selflessness, and the ability to overcome egoic desires in order to access the divine wisdom that the Grail represents. It is not enough to simply search for external validation. The quest for the Grail is ultimately an internal journey, one that leads to greater self-awareness and spiritual fulfillment. By letting go of material distractions, the seeker can attain divine connection and achieve inner peace, the ultimate reward of the Grail quest. The Grail as a mirror of collective consciousness. The Holy Grail is not just a symbol of personal transformation. It also reflects the collective evolution of humanity. Just as individuals embark on their own quests for meaning, society as a whole is undergoing a spiritual awakening. In this sense, the Grail becomes a mirror for our shared consciousness, a symbol of our desire to heal from collective trauma, restore lost values, and reconnect with spiritual truths that transcend religion, culture, and ideology. The Grail legends emerged in a time of moral confusion and spiritual uncertainty, offering a mythical framework for hope and renewal. Today, we live in a similarly fragmented world, one where materialism often overshadows spiritual values, and disconnection is more common than unity. The modern Grail quest, therefore, speaks to our need for reconnection, not only with the divine, but also with each other. The search for the Grail becomes a metaphor for healing the collective soul, a path toward greater empathy, wisdom, and shared purpose. In movements around the world, from ecological activism to interfaith dialogue, people are awakening to the interconnectedness of life. These efforts echo the spirit of the Grail, the restoration of wholeness, not just within ourselves but within our societies and ecosystems. The Grail invites us to transcend division, to become stewards of spiritual and environmental harmony, and to contribute to the healing of the planetary consciousness. The wounded king and the healing of the land central to the Grail myth is the image of the wounded fisher king, whose suffering reflects the damage done to the land. This archetype represents the brokenness that arises when we are disconnected from our inner truth. His land is barren because he is unwell, and the restoration of both king and kingdom can only occur when the right question is asked: whom does the Grail serve? This symbolic question challenges us to reflect on our motives and intentions. Are we seeking spiritual power for ourselves alone, or are we using it in service to others? The healing of the king, and by extension the world, requires compassion, humility, and the realization that our personal healing is linked to the healing of the world. Modern society mirrors the mythic wasteland, where disconnection from the sacred, from nature, and from community leads to despair. But just as the Grail legend offers a path to restoration, so too do we have the opportunity to bring life back to the barren places in our world. This involves not only personal growth, but also active compassion, service, and a willingness to confront the systems and beliefs that perpetuate suffering. Integrating the Grail into everyday life. In practical terms, the modern Grail quest invites us to live with intention, to seek meaning in daily actions, and to remain connected to our spiritual purpose. This doesn't require heroic deeds in distant lands. It can be found in the way we treat others, the way we care for the earth, and the way we pursue our inner truth despite obstacles. To live the Grail path is to be mindful, present, and authentic. It means listening to the voice within, honoring our unique path, and holding ourselves accountable to a greater spiritual standard. The quest becomes a way of life, one marked not by perfection, but by continuous growth, humility, and service. Many spiritual seekers today embody this Grail spirit by combining ancient wisdom with modern insight. Whether through Jungian psychology, mythology, or contemplative practice, the Grail remains alive in those who dare to ask deep questions, challenge the status quo, and walk a path of meaningful transformation. The eternal call of the Grail. The Grail is timeless because it represents an eternal truth, that we are all on a journey toward wholeness. The trials we face, the wounds we carry, and the lessons we learn are part of a greater process of awakening. Like the knights of legend, we are called not to conquer, but to heal, to remember, and to serve. This is not a one-time event, but an ongoing return to what matters most. The Grail reminds us that the path is never lost, as long as we continue to seek with sincerity, act with love, and grow in wisdom. In this way, the Grail is not just a legend, but a living invitation, one that speaks across centuries and cultures, calling each of us to rise, transform, and become vessels of the sacred. Whom does the Grail serve? This question remains as relevant now as it was in myth. The answer is not found in wealth, success, or status, but in service, humility, and love. The Grail serves those who serve others, those who live with purpose and seek to heal the world as they heal themselves. To walk the Grail path today means to live in alignment with truth, to act with courage, and to offer oneself as a vessel through which the divine may flow. The Grail is not a relic of the past, it is a guide for our future.